He wasn't meant to be easy prey. Not tonight. Not ever again. The man standing under the flickering porch light looked like time had already taken everything from him. Shoulders bent, breath thin in the cold November air, a worn flannel hanging loose over bones that had outlived their strength. And to anyone passing by that quiet stretch of road just outside Mill Creek, he would have seemed like the kind of man the world forgets without noticing, the kind of man who leaves no echo when he's gone. But what no one saw, what no one ever bothered to look for, was the stillness in his eyes, not fear, not surrender, but something else, something patient, something waiting. And that was the mistake, the kind of mistake that begins quietly and ends in a way no one expects. A truck rolled slowly past the property, tires crunching gravel like a whisper too heavy to hide, headlights cutting across the peeling paint of the old house, pausing just long enough to study the scene, the man, the isolation, the absence of movement. And behind the wheel, Ethan Cole leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping once against the steering wheel, as if confirming a thought he had already decided was true. Alone, he assumed. Just another forgotten man at the edge of nowhere. Just another door no one would hear open. Just another story that wouldn't travel far. And that assumption settled into him like certainty, the most dangerous kind. The wind moved through the trees with a low, hollow sound, carrying the scent of damp wood and distant rain, brushing past the porch where a small metal bowl sat near the steps, filled with water that hadn't yet gone cold, a detail so small it barely existed, and yet it lingered, quietly out of place, like a sentence missing its ending. The old man, Walter Green, shifted slightly, his hand tightening around the edge of the railing not out of fear, but habit, like someone who had learned long ago that balance was less about strength and more about knowing when to lean. And his gaze drifted out past the road, past the truck that had now come to a stop just beyond the trees, as if he already knew something was coming, not with urgency, not with dread, but with a kind of quiet acceptance that only comes from having seen too much and survived it anyway. Inside the house, nothing moved, no television glow, no radio hum, just the soft creak of old wood settling into the night. And somewhere deeper, beneath that silence, there was a presence, not loud, not restless, but aware, the kind of awareness that doesn't need to announce itself to be real, the kind that watches before it acts, that waits before it decides. And outside, Ethan opened the truck door slowly, stepping out into the chill, pulling his jacket tighter as he glanced once more toward the porch, measuring distance, timing, possibility, every step calculated, every assumption unchecked, because he believed the story was already written, because he believed he understood the ending before it began. Walter didn't move when he heard the gravel shift under approaching boots, didn't call out, didn't turn. He simply stood there, breathing in the cold air like it belonged to him, like this place, this moment, this quiet, was something no one could take. And for a brief second, just a fraction of time that slipped between footsteps, there was a feeling in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the night itself was holding its breath, like something unseen had already decided how this would unfold. The porch light flickered once more, casting shadows that stretched and recoiled along the wooden boards, and Ethan stepped closer, close enough now to see the lines on the old man's face, the years etched into skin that had not broken, not yet, and he almost smiled, almost convinced himself that this was as simple as it looked. But then his eyes caught something, just for a second, something low, something near the edge of the doorway, something that didn't move but didn't need to, and he paused, not fully, not enough to turn back, but just enough for doubt to brush against certainty. And doubt, even in its smallest form, has a way of changing everything. Walter spoke then, his voice quiet, steady, as if he were greeting someone expected rather than feared. "You're late," he said, not turning, not raising his voice, just letting the words settle into the space between them. And Ethan frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his face before he masked it, before he stepped forward again, because whatever this was, whatever didn't quite fit, he believed he still controlled it. He believed he still understood it. And that belief, more than anything else, kept him moving forward into a story that had already begun without him. The wind shifted again, colder now, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something deeper, something steadier, like breath held with purpose, and somewhere in that darkness, just beyond what the eye could fully claim, something was watching back. Before we begin, tell me, where are witching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The air did not move the way it should have. It carried weight, like something unseen had settled into the space between breath and sound, and Ethan felt it before he understood it. A pressure that did not belong to the cold or the night or the man standing quietly in front of him, but something else entirely, something that did not rush, did not reveal itself, only existed with a kind of certainty that made the silence feel deliberate. Walter Green remained still, his hand resting against the worn wood of the railing, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond Ethan, as if the young man had already been accounted for, as if whatever mattered had nothing to do with him at all, and that absence of fear, that quiet refusal to react, began to unsettle something deep inside Ethan, something he could not name, because fear he understood, hesitation he expected, but this calm, this almost gentle acknowledgement of his presence, felt wrong, like stepping into a room where a conversation had already begun without him. "You're late," Walter had said, and the words lingered now, heavier than they should have been, because Ethan knew he had never been here before, never spoken to this man, never made any promise that could be broken, and yet the sentence had not sounded mistaken, it had sounded accurate. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting his weight slightly, forcing a small breath through his nose as he glanced past Walter toward the open doorway, the darkness inside stretching back into a space he could not fully see, and for a moment, just a brief moment, he thought he caught something, a shape, low, still, blending into the shadow in a way that made it almost invisible, and then it was gone, or maybe it had never moved at all, and that was what made it worse. The porch light flickered again, casting a thin pulse of yellow across the boards, and the metal bowl near the steps reflected it faintly, the surface of the water trembling not from wind, but from something else, something subtle, like a vibration too soft to hear, and Ethan's eyes dropped to it without thinking, drawn to the detail he had ignored before, water that had not yet gone still, as if something had disturbed it moments ago, something that stood lower than a man, closer to the ground. Something patient enough to wait without being seen. Walter exhaled slowly, the sound steady, almost tired, and then he shifted just enough to step aside from the doorway, not in invitation, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement, as if making room for something Ethan had not yet recognized. And that movement, small as it was, changed the space entirely, because now the darkness inside the house was no longer blocked, no longer distant. It was open, present, watching back. "You should not be here," Walter said quietly, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a simple truth, the kind spoken by someone who already knew how the moment would end, and Ethan felt a flicker of irritation rise in his chest, sharp and defensive, pushing back against the unease that had begun to settle into his bones, because he did not like not understanding, he did not like feeling observed, measured, reduced to something predictable. And so he took another step forward, slow, deliberate, forcing the moment back into something he could control. The floorboard beneath his boot creaked, the sound cutting through the silence like a line drawn too sharply. And immediately, something answered, not with noise, but with presence, a shift in the air so subtle it might have been imagined if not for the way Ethan's breath caught halfway in his chest, the way his body reacted before his mind could explain it. From the edge of the doorway, just beyond the reach of the porch light, 2 points of amber caught the dim glow, not bright, not sudden, but steady, unwavering, and fixed entirely on him. They did not blink. They did not move. They simply existed, watching with a clarity that felt older than the moment, older than the night, older than the assumption that had brought him here in the first place. Ethan froze, not out of fear, not yet, but out of recognition, the kind that arrives before understanding, the kind that tells you something has shifted and cannot be shifted back, and slowly, almost unwillingly, the outline began to form around those eyes, a shape emerging from the darkness not by stepping forward, but by allowing itself to be seen, a broad chest, a still frame, ears held high with quiet precision, and a posture that did not threaten, did not rush, but claimed the space with absolute certainty. Walter did not turn to look. He did not need to. His voice came again, softer this time, almost like a man speaking to someone he trusted more than himself. "Easy now," he murmured, and the words did not belong to Ethan. They never had. And in that moment, the truth settled in fully, heavy and undeniable. This place had never been empty. This man had never been alone, and whatever had been waiting in the dark had not just been watching, it had been waiting for him. The eyes did not move, but everything around them seemed to shift. Not in sound, not in motion, but in weight, as if the night itself had leaned in closer to witness what would come next, and Ethan felt it settle across his shoulders, pressing lightly but firmly, the kind of pressure that does not force you to stop, but makes you question why you are still moving at all. He swallowed once, slow, controlled, his gaze locked onto those amber points that had now fully claimed his attention. And for the first time since stepping out of his truck, he stopped thinking about what he planned to do and started thinking about what he might not understand. The shape behind those eyes became clearer, not by stepping forward, but by allowing the light to catch it piece by piece. The curve of a strong neck, the outline of a broad chest, the steady line of a back that did not bend or sway, and the stillness, more than anything. That stillness was what unsettled him most, because it was not hesitation, it was not uncertainty, it was control, the kind of control that does not need to prove itself. Walter Green shifted his weight slightly, his boots scraping softly against the wood, and for the first time, he turned his head just enough to glance toward the doorway, not directly at the figure in the shadows, but near it, like someone acknowledging a presence they trusted without needing to confirm it. And there was something in that glance, something quiet and deeply rooted, that made Ethan feel like he had stepped into something far older than a simple mistake. "It is all right," Walter said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that did not match the cold air, and the words settled into the space like a reassurance offered not to Ethan, but to the presence behind him. And in response, there was a shift, subtle but unmistakable, a slight adjustment of stance, a breath released slowly through the nose, controlled, measured, and then stillness again, deeper this time, as if a decision had been made. Ethan exhaled, longer than he intended, and took a half step back before he realized he was doing it. The instinct quiet but undeniable, his body responding to something his mind had not yet caught up to, and he frowned, forcing himself to stop, to stand his ground, to reclaim whatever control he believed he had when he first arrived. But that control felt thinner now, like a story losing its shape the longer it was told. "You got a dog," Ethan said finally, his voice steady but lacking the confidence it carried before, and the simplicity of the statement felt almost absurd against the weight of what he was experiencing, as if naming it would make it ordinary, would shrink it back into something manageable. But nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Walter let out a soft breath that almost sounded like a faint chuckle, not mocking, not dismissive, just knowing, and he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "He has me," Walter replied, and the difference in those words, small as it was, landed harder than Ethan expected, shifting the balance of the moment in a way that could not be undone, because it was not about ownership, not about possession, it was about something else entirely, something shared, something chosen. The dog stepped forward then, not with urgency, not with aggression, but with purpose, a single step that brought him just enough into the light for Ethan to see him clearly. The sable coat catching the dim glow, dark along the spine, lighter at the edges, muscles held in quiet readiness, and those eyes, still locked, still unwavering, watching not just what Ethan did, but what he might do next. There was no sound, no bark, no warning, just presence, and that presence filled the doorway completely, closing the space between inside and out, between past and present, between assumption and truth. Ethan felt his chest tighten slightly, not from fear, not yet, but from the realization that whatever had brought him here had been based on something incomplete, something missing, and now that missing piece stood in front of him, breathing, watching, waiting, and he could not ignore it, could not step around it, could not pretend it was not there. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed along the main road, the faint hum of tires against asphalt drifting through the trees, a reminder that the world beyond this moment still existed, still moved forward. But here, on this porch, time felt different, slower, heavier, as if it had chosen to linger just long enough for something to be understood. Walter's hand lowered from the railing, resting gently at his side, and without looking, he reached slightly behind him, his fingers brushing the air near the dog's shoulder, not quite touching, but close enough to be felt, and the dog leaned just slightly into that space, not seeking comfort, but acknowledging it. And in that small, quiet exchange, something became clear, something Ethan could not explain but could not deny. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. This was connection, built over time, tested in ways he could not see, and standing in front of it now, he felt, for the first time, like he was the one out of place. The distance between them had not changed, but everything else had. It was no longer a porch, no longer a quiet night on the edge of a forgotten road. It had become something narrower, more precise, like a line drawn carefully between what was allowed and what was not, and Ethan stood on the wrong side of it without fully understanding when he had crossed. The dog did not advance again, did not need to, because that single step had already said enough, had already defined the space in a way that could not be argued with, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was structured, intentional, like a conversation where one side had already spoken and the other was expected to listen. Ethan shifted his weight again, slower this time, more aware of the sound his boots made against the wood, more aware of how each small movement seemed to register in those steady amber eyes. And for a moment, he considered speaking, saying anything to break the tension, to return the moment to something familiar. But the words did not come easily now. They felt unnecessary, even misplaced, like trying to explain something that had already been understood. Walter Green stepped back slightly, just enough to lean against the doorframe. His body relaxed in a way that did not match the situation, and he looked at Ethan with a calm that was neither welcoming nor rejecting, simply present, and that presence carried a quiet authority that did not need to raise its voice. "You ever notice," Walter said slowly, his tone almost reflective, "how the world gets real quiet right before a man realizes he is not where he thought he was?" The question hung there, not demanding an answer, not even expecting one, but it settled into Ethan's chest with a weight that made him inhale a little deeper, as if the air itself had changed. He glanced once more at the dog, taking in the details now with sharper focus, the way the muscles held steady under the coat, the way the ears remained alert but not tense, the way the chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths. And there was something familiar in that posture, something trained, something disciplined. Not wild, not unpredictable, but controlled in a way that suggested purpose rather than instinct. "That your dog?" Ethan asked again, softer now, less certain, and Walter gave a small shake of his head, almost as if the question itself missed the point. "No," Walter said, his voice quiet but firm. "That is not how it works." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "He stays because he chooses to. That is different." The distinction lingered in the air, subtle but powerful, and Ethan felt it, even if he could not fully explain it, because there was something about choice, about loyalty that was not owned but given, that made the situation feel less like chance and more like something earned. The wind shifted again, brushing past the porch and through the open doorway, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and pine. And somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked softly, not from movement, but from age, from the quiet settling of a place that had stood long enough to remember things most people forgot. Ethan's gaze drifted briefly past the dog, into the dim interior, and for a moment he saw it. A glimpse of something on the wall, a frame catching the faintest sliver of light, a photograph perhaps, or a shadow of one, and beside it, something smaller, metallic, hanging still, and though he could not make out the details, the shape was enough to suggest a story, one that did not begin tonight, one that had been unfolding long before he arrived. He looked back at Walter, studying him more carefully now, the lines on his face, the steadiness in his posture, the absence of fear that had unsettled him from the beginning, and slowly, reluctantly, a realization began to take form. This was not a man waiting to be taken advantage of. This was a man who had already endured more than Ethan could see, and whatever remained here, whatever quiet life had settled into this place, was not unguarded. It was protected in a way that did not need to announce itself. The dog's head tilted slightly, just a fraction, as if adjusting to a change in thought rather than movement, And that small motion was enough to draw Ethan's attention again, enough to remind him that every second he remained here was being observed, measured, understood in ways he could not fully grasp. Walter straightened just a little, not in defense, but in quiet conclusion, and he looked at Ethan with a gaze that carried no anger, no accusation, only clarity. "Son," he said gently, "you walked up here thinking you were looking at the end of something." He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to matter. "But you were standing at the beginning of understanding it." The words did not land like a warning. They landed like a truth already decided. And in that moment, with the night still holding its breath and those amber eyes still fixed on him, Ethan realized that whatever he thought this was, whatever story he believed he was stepping into, had never belonged to him at all. Something shifted before anyone moved. Not in the air, not in the light, but in the space between intention and consequence, and Ethan felt it like a quiet correction, as if the night itself had adjusted its course without asking him. The dog remained where he was, steady, grounded, but there was a subtle change now, not forward, not aggressive, but deeper, more anchored, like a line driven into the earth that would not be crossed. And that line did not need to be spoken, it was understood. Ethan's throat tightened slightly as he drew in a breath that did not feel as full as the ones before, and he became aware of something he had not noticed until now. The rhythm of the dog's breathing, slow, controlled, unwavering, and against that rhythm, his own felt uneven, too quick, too shallow, and that contrast, small as it was, unsettled him more than anything else. Walter Green watched him quietly, his eyes not sharp, not judging, but observant in a way that carried years behind it. And he seemed to be waiting, not for a reaction, not for an apology, but for understanding, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but settles in slowly, piece by piece, until it cannot be ignored. "You ever had someone stand watch for you?" Walter asked softly, his voice low enough that it felt like part of the night rather than separate from it. Not because they were told to, not because they had to, but because they chose to stay? Ethan did not answer, not because he did not want to, but because the question reached somewhere he had not expected, somewhere deeper than the moment itself. And for a second, his gaze drifted away from the dog, away from Walter, out toward the dark road where his truck still sat, engine cooling, presence fading, and it struck him how far that felt now, not in distance, but in certainty, like something he had already left behind without realizing it. The dog's ears flicked once, a small movement, precise, as if catching a sound too faint for human ears, and then they settled again, forward, focused, and Ethan followed that motion instinctively, his eyes scanning the edges of the yard, the trees, the darkness beyond, and for the first time, he felt what it meant to be the one observed, the one measured, not by hostility, not by threat, but by something more exacting, something that simply knew. Walter shifted slightly, stepping fully aside from the doorway now, opening the space behind him, and the interior of the house revealed itself just enough to be seen. A small table near the wall, a lamp turned low, its light warm but dim, and above it, clearly now, a photograph, a younger version of Walter standing beside a man in uniform, both of them facing forward, both of them carrying that same quiet steadiness. And beneath the frame, hanging still and unmoving, a pair of dog tags caught the light with a faint metallic glint. Ethan's eyes lingered there longer than he intended, drawn not by curiosity, but by recognition of something he could not fully name, something that connected the past to the present in a way that made this moment feel less like an accident and more like a continuation. "He was not always here," Walter said, following Ethan's gaze without turning his head, his voice softer now, almost reflective. "Came to me one winter, ribs showing. Eyes still sharp though, would not leave the edge of the yard no matter how many times I told him to go." He paused, a faint breath passing through his lips. "Took me 3 days before he stepped close enough to trust my hand." The dog did not react to the story, did not shift or look away, but something in his posture eased just slightly, not relaxed, not unguarded, but acknowledged, like a memory shared without words. Ethan looked back at him, really looked this time, not as an obstacle, not as a complication, but as something real, something rooted, in the certainty that had brought him here, the simple, easy assumption, began to unravel in a way that left him standing in the middle of something he no longer controlled. "And you stayed," Ethan said quietly, not fully realizing he had spoken until the words were already out, and Walter nodded once, slow and certain. "No," he replied gently, his eyes flicking toward the dog for just a moment. "He did." The distinction settled deeper this time, heavier, undeniable, and Ethan felt it fully now, the weight of it, the meaning behind it, because this was not about a dog guarding a man. This was about something choosing to stand where it did, to remain where it was needed, without command, without obligation, and that kind of presence, that kind of loyalty, could not be challenged, could not be pushed aside. It could only be respected or misunderstood. The night held steady around them, the wind quieter now, the trees still, and somewhere in that stillness, Ethan felt the final shift, not outside, but within, the realization that whatever path had led him here was no longer the one he would walk away with. And as those amber eyes remained fixed on him, calm and unyielding, he understood something simple and absolute. He had not been stopped, he had been seen. The silence did not break, it deepened. It settled into the spaces between them like something intentional, something chosen, and Ethan stood there with the strange awareness that nothing more needed to happen for everything to change. The dog had not moved again, had not needed to, and yet the entire moment continued to revolve around him, around that quiet, unwavering presence that asked for nothing and demanded everything at the same time. Ethan let out a slow breath, longer than the ones before, and this time he did not try to steady it, did not try to control how it sounded or how it felt, because something in him had already begun to loosen, not in weakness, but in recognition. He glanced once more toward the photograph inside, the two men frozen in time, one older, one younger, both standing with that same grounded posture, and then his eyes dropped to the dog tags beneath it, the faint glint catching the low light, and it became clear that whatever had been built here had not been built overnight. It had been shaped through years, through choices, through moments that did not announce themselves, but still mattered. Walter Green followed that gaze again, his expression unchanged, but there was something softer now, not sympathy, not pity, just understanding, the kind that does not need to be explained. "He belonged to someone once," Walter said quietly, his voice steady as the night around them. "A Marine, name was Daniel Hayes." The name hung in the air for a moment, unfamiliar to Ethan, but it carried weight nonetheless, like something meant to be remembered even if it was not yet understood. "Good man," Walter continued, "the kind who did not say much, but when he looked at you, you knew where you stood." Walter paused briefly, his eyes drifting not to the dog, but somewhere just past him, as if looking at something that was no longer there. He did not make it back from his last deployment. The words were simple, spoken without drama, without emphasis, and that simplicity made them land heavier than anything else that had been said that night. Ethan shifted again, but this time it was not discomfort. It was something else, something closer to respect, or perhaps realization, and he looked at the dog differently now, not just as a presence, not just as a barrier, but as something carrying more than the moment, something that had stayed when something else had been lost. The dog remained still, but there was a subtle change in his posture, not movement, not reaction, but a quiet acknowledgement of the name, of the memory, as if it existed not just in Walter's words, but in him as well. "He waited," Walter said, his voice lowering slightly. "Weeks at first, then months, right out there by the road." He nodded faintly toward the dark stretch beyond the yard. Every engine that passed, he would lift his head, every set of headlights, he would stand, just in case. Ethan followed that line of sight again, imagining it now, the dog standing where the gravel met the asphalt, watching, waiting, not because he was told to, not because he expected anything, but because something in him refused to let go of what had been. "People told me to take him in sooner," Walter added, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth, said it was not right to let him wait like that. He shook his head slightly, but that was not my choice to make. The distinction settled again, deeper this time, and Ethan felt it fully, the difference between taking something and being chosen, between ownership and loyalty freely given, and it shifted something in him in a way that no confrontation ever could. The wind moved softly through the trees again, quieter now, almost gentle, and the night no longer felt heavy. It felt still, like something had reached its natural point of balance. Ethan looked back at the dog, really looked, and what he saw was not just strength, not just awareness, but something steadier, something grounded in a way that did not need to prove itself. And for the first time, he did not feel challenged by it. He felt measured by it. Walter's hand finally came to rest lightly against the dog's shoulder. A simple touch, brief but certain, and the dog leaned into it just slightly. Enough to acknowledge, not enough to depend. And in that small moment, the entire story seemed to settle into place without needing to be spoken aloud. Ethan lowered his gaze for a second, not in defeat, not in shame, but in understanding, the kind that arrives quietly and stays. And when he looked back up, the night felt different, not because anything had changed outside, but because something inside him had. He took a small step back, then another, not hurried, not uncertain, just deliberate, like someone choosing a different direction without needing to explain why. And the dog watched him still, those amber eyes steady, not following, not pressing, just observing until the distance between them grew enough to matter. Walter did not speak again, did not need to. And as Ethan reached the edge of the porch, the gravel beneath his boots crunching softly, he realized that nothing had been taken from him tonight. Nothing had been forced, but something had been given, something quiet, something lasting. And as he stepped back into the darkness beyond the light, he understood that some boundaries are not drawn to keep people out, but to remind them where they truly stand. The gravel shifted under Ethan's boots as he stepped farther from the porch, each crunch softer than the last, as if even the ground understood that something had already been decided and did not need to be disturbed. The porch light behind him flickered once more, then steadied, casting a warm, quiet glow that no longer felt harsh or exposing, but constant, like a place that had always been there and would remain long after this moment passed. Ethan reached the edge of the yard and stopped, not because anything held him there, but because something in him needed a second longer, a final look, a confirmation that what he had just experienced was real and not some trick of the dark or the cold or his own expectations unraveling. He turned slightly, not fully, just enough to see the outline of Walter Green still standing near the doorway, shoulders relaxed, posture unchanged, and beside him, the dog, steady as before, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of breath that seemed to anchor the entire scene in place. There was no tension left in that space now, no edge, no threat, only presence. And that presence did not follow Ethan as he moved, did not chase or call him back. It simply remained, as it always had, as it always would. Ethan exhaled through his nose, the air leaving him in a long, quiet stream, and he realized something that had not been clear before. He had come here expecting resistance, expecting confrontation, expecting something he could push against or outmaneuver. But what he found instead had not resisted him at all. It had revealed him, and that was something far more difficult to carry. The night air felt different now, not colder, not warmer, just clearer, like a fog had lifted from a place he had not known was clouded. And as he looked down the road toward his truck, the shape of it seemed smaller somehow, less certain, like it belonged to a version of himself that no longer stood here. Behind him, Walter spoke again, not loudly, not urgently, just enough for the words to reach where they needed to go. "You can leave with whatever you brought here," he said calmly, "or you can leave with something better." Ethan did not turn back this time, but the words settled into him all the same, simple, direct, without expectation, and for a moment, he considered responding, offering something in return, but there was nothing to add, nothing to argue, nothing to explain. Some moments do not ask for words, they ask for understanding, and that understanding had already begun to take root. The dog shifted then, just once, a small adjustment of weight, a single step back toward the doorway, not retreating, not disengaging, but returning to where he belonged, and that movement carried no urgency, no reaction, only completion, like a task that had never been spoken but had been fulfilled all the same. Ethan watched that step longer than he intended, the simplicity of it, the quiet certainty, and he felt something in his chest loosen just enough to breathe differently, to stand differently, to see differently. He turned fully now, facing the road, and began to walk again, each step more grounded than the last, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate. like someone choosing direction with clarity rather than impulse. The trees along the edge of the property swayed lightly in the breeze, their shadows stretching across the gravel in long, shifting lines, and the sound of his footsteps blended into that quiet rhythm until it no longer stood out at all. When he reached his truck, he paused once more, his hand resting on the door handle, and for a brief second, he looked back again, but this time, not out of doubt, not out of uncertainty, but out of recognition, and what he saw was exactly what had been there all along: a man, a house, a dog, and something deeper than any of it, something that did not need to be named to be understood. The porch light remained steady, the doorway still open, the silhouette unchanged, and the dog stood just inside now, partially hidden by shadow, but those amber eyes still visible, still calm, still watching, not to follow, not to judge, but simply to witness. Ethan opened the truck door slowly, the metal creaking softly in the quiet, and as he climbed inside, he took one last breath of the night air before closing it behind him, sealing the moment not as something he escaped, but as something he carried. The engine turned over with a low, steady hum, and the headlights cut through the darkness once more, illuminating the path ahead. But this time, the road did not feel empty. It felt known, like something he had always seen but had only now begun to understand. And as the truck pulled away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, the porch light fading into a distant glow, but the feeling it left behind did not fade with it. It remained, quiet, steady, like a presence that did not need to follow to be remembered. And in that lingering stillness, Ethan realized that some encounters do not change your direction all at once. They change the way you walk it, one step at a time. The road stretched long and quiet ahead of him, cutting through the dark like a thin line drawn between what had been and what might still become, and Ethan drove without music, without distraction, the steady hum of the engine filling the space where his thoughts had once rushed too quickly to be understood. The headlights swept across the trees, illuminating them in brief passing frames, each one appearing and disappearing like moments he had never stopped to examine. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to outrun anything, not the past, not the silence, not even himself. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, no tension, no urgency, just control, quiet and deliberate. And that difference, subtle as it was, carried weight, because it had not come from effort. It had come from something shifting inside him, something that had settled without asking permission. The image of the porch stayed with him, not as a memory fading into distance, but as something anchored, something steady, the way Walter had stood. Without fear, the way the dog had watched without aggression, the way neither of them had needed to raise their voices to be understood. It was not power in the way Ethan had always defined it. It was something else, something quieter, something that did not push or take, but simply existed with certainty, and that certainty had changed the way he saw everything else. He slowed slightly as he approached a bend in the road, the tires crunching softly against loose gravel at the shoulder, and for a moment, he considered pulling over, not because he had to, but because the night felt different now, like it was offering something he had never taken the time to notice before. The wind moved gently across the open stretch of land, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth, and he rolled the window down just an inch, enough to let the air in, enough to feel it without losing the warmth inside the cab. It was quiet out here, the kind of quiet that did not feel empty, but full, like something alive beneath the surface, something patient. His mind drifted back again, not to the moment itself, but to what it revealed, the way he had walked up that path with certainty, with assumption, with a story already written in his head, and how easily that story had unraveled the moment it met something real. He had not been confronted, not in the way he expected. There had been no raised voices, no sudden movements, no force, and yet he had stopped. He had stepped back. He had chosen to leave, not because he was made to, but because something inside him had recognized a boundary that could not be crossed without losing something more than he was willing to give. That realization stayed with him now, settling deeper with each mile, shaping the way he held the wheel, the way he looked at the road, the way he breathed in the quiet around him. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, another car moving in the opposite direction, and as they passed, the brief flash of light filled the cabin before fading again into darkness, And in that moment, Ethan saw his own reflection in the windshield, faint, almost ghosted against the night, and for a second, he did not look away. There was something different there, not in his features, not in the lines of his face, but in his eyes, less sharp, less guarded, as if something had softened without weakening, as if something had been set down that he had not realized he was carrying. The road straightened out again, long and open, and he pressed lightly on the accelerator, not to rush, but to continue, because that was what mattered now, not where he had been, not what he had thought before, but what he chose to do with what he understood now. Somewhere behind him, far enough to be unseen but not forgotten, a porch light still burned quietly against the night, a small point of warmth in a wide stretch of darkness. And though he could no longer see it, he knew it was there, steady, unchanged, not waiting, not calling, just existing in the same quiet certainty that had stopped him without ever stepping forward. Ethan drove on, the miles passing beneath him, the night unfolding ahead, and for the first time, the road did not feel like something to escape into. It felt like something to walk with, something to move through with awareness rather than avoidance. And as the trees thinned and the sky opened slightly above him, he realized something simple, something that did not need to be spoken aloud to be true. Some lessons do not come from being told what is right or wrong. They come from standing close enough to something steady that you begin to see yourself more clearly in its reflection. Morning did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like light remembering where it had been before the dark, and the first pale glow stretched across the edge of the sky as if it had nowhere urgent to be. The road behind Ethan was long gone now, folded into distance, into memory, into something that no longer needed to be retraced, and his truck moved steadily along the open highway, the tires humming softly against the asphalt in a rhythm that no longer felt restless, only continuous. The air had shifted sometime during the night, losing its bite, carrying instead a faint warmth that hinted at something new without demanding it, and Ethan drove with the window slightly open, letting that air pass through, letting it settle where it needed to. He did not rush. He did not slow. He simply moved forward, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Back at the house, the porch light had gone out with the rising sun, not switched off, but outgrown by the day itself, and Walter Green stood just inside the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, his eyes following the soft spread of light across the yard, as if he were watching something familiar return. The night had left no mark behind, no sign of interruption, no trace of the moment that had passed, and yet something remained, something quiet and steady, something that did not need evidence to be real. The metal bowl by the steps had been refilled, the surface of the water still and clear, reflecting the pale sky above, and beside it, just a few inches away, the dog lay with his body curved slightly along the edge of the porch, not asleep, not fully awake, simply present, as he had been through the night, as he had been through every night that mattered. His eyes were half open, catching the morning light with a softer glow now, less intense, but no less aware, and when Walter stepped forward, the dog lifted his head just enough to acknowledge him, not seeking direction, not waiting for command, just recognizing the movement of someone he had already chosen. Walter paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the quiet stretch of land, the trees standing still, the road empty, and he took in a slow breath, the kind that comes from knowing something has passed without needing to define it. Another one who needed to see it for himself. He murmured, more to the air than to the dog, and the dog's ears flicked slightly in response, not in agreement, not in reaction, just in awareness, and then settled again. Walter stepped down onto the gravel, his boots pressing softly into the earth, and he walked a few feet out into the yard, stopping where the edge of the property met the open road, the same place where the dog had once stood waiting, watching every passing car, every set of headlights, every possibility that might have brought something back that could not return. He looked down at the ground for a moment, then back up at the horizon, and there was no sadness in his expression, no regret, only understanding, the kind that comes when time has done its work and left behind something steadier than before. Behind him, the dog rose slowly, stretching once, then stepping forward with that same measured calm, moving not out of duty, not out of habit, but simply because that was where he chose to be, beside the man, near the road, within the quiet boundary that had been drawn not by fence or sign, but by something far more enduring. They stood there together for a moment, not speaking, not moving, just sharing the space as the morning light grew stronger, as the shadows shortened, as the world returned to its usual rhythm. And in that stillness, there was no need for explanation, no need for reflection, because what mattered had already settled into place. Far down the highway, unseen now, but still connected in some quiet way, Ethan continued driving, the road stretching ahead of him not as an escape, but as a path. And though he could not see the house anymore, could not see the porch, the man, or the dog, something of that place remained with him, not as a memory that would fade, but as a presence that would shape the way he saw what came next. And back at the edge of that quiet property, where the gravel met the road and the morning met the day, the dog stood once more, still, steady, watching not for what might come, but for what already was. And in that quiet watch, in that simple act of being there without needing to prove it, there was something greater than protection, something deeper than instinct, something that did not announce itself, did not ask to be named, but lived in the space between loyalty and grace, where the smallest presence can change the direction of a life without ever taking a step forward. In this deeply moving cinematic tale, a quiet old man living on the edge of a forgotten road becomes the center of an unexpected encounter when a stranger assumes he is alone, only to discover the silent presence of a loyal German shepherd who watches with unwavering calm and purpose. This story unfolds not through force, but through stillness, where a former Marine's legacy lives on through his dog, revealing a powerful bond of loyalty, memory, and protection that transcends words and time. As tension builds in this emotionally rich narrative, the intruder begins to realize that true strength does not always announce itself, and that some forms of justice arrive without confrontation, guided instead by presence, restraint, and quiet authority. This is one of those unforgettable animal stories where the connection between human and dog becomes a reflection of something deeper, something spiritual, where the past continues to guard the present in ways that cannot be seen but can always be felt. Through vivid atmosphere, slow-burning suspense, and heartfelt emotional transitions, this story captures the essence of animal stories that go beyond simple companionship and enter the realm of purpose and grace. The old man stands not as a victim, but as a witness to loyalty that was earned, not owned, while the dog embodies the enduring spirit of a Marine who never truly left, creating a powerful narrative that resonates with anyone who believes in unseen bonds. As the stranger walks away changed, carrying a quiet understanding he did not expect, the audience is left with a lingering sense that some encounters are meant to redirect a life without ever raising a voice. This is what makes the most impactful animal stories so compelling. Not the action, but the transformation, not the conflict, but the clarity that follows. Grounded in realism and emotional truth, this story stands among the most meaningful animal stories that highlight how loyalty, memory, and silent protection can shape human choices in profound ways. And in the end, it reminds us that the most powerful guardians are not always the loudest, but the ones who choose to stay, watch, and protect without needing to be seen, making this one of those rare animal stories that stays with you long after the final moment fades.